preparing for a shift in EPA regulations, creative ways to adapt to tariffs, and Chinese robots are on the move. Pull up a chair and join us as the editors of DC Velocity discuss these stories, as well as news and supply chain trends on this week's Logistics Matters podcast. Hi, I'm Dave Maloney. I'm the Group Editorial Director at DC Velocity. Welcome. Logistics Matters is sponsored by Duravant Integrated Solutions. Duravant Integrated Solutions brings precision and efficiency to every stage of your operation. Leveraging equipment from 4 leading brands, FMH Conveyors, QC Conveyors, NPI Sorters, and WolfTech, they streamline handling, routing, and sorting systems that help your warehouse or distribution center achieve peak performance every step of the way. Visit Duravant.com for more information. As usual, our DC Velocity senior editors Ben Ames and Victoria Kickham will be along to provide their insights into the top stories of this week. But to begin today, among the many changes happening in Washington is a reprioritizing of environmental issues. The Environmental Protection Agency is among many of the government agencies that have undergone dramatic policy changes. To find out more about those changes and how to prepare for shifting EPA regulations is Victoria with today's guest. Victoria?
Thanks, Dave. Our guest today is Sean Daley, Director of Sustainability Consulting at technology and consulting firm Sphera. And as you say, he's here to talk with us about recent changes to the federal government's greenhouse gas reporting program, as well as other sustainability issues. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So to start, can you first just give us a brief overview of Sphera? What does the company do? What services does it provide?
Sure thing. So Sphera is a global sustainability solutions provider. We help organizations manage sustainability risks and performance through software, data, and expert consulting. The solutions we provide typically make it easier for companies to measure, manage, and report on everything from their sustainability performance to operational risk, as well as product life cycle.
Terrific. Thank you. So the EPA has announced plans to eliminate its greenhouse gas reporting program. This is part of the Trump administration's regulatory reform agenda. Can you tell us, who does this affect exactly? And are these standards that most companies must comply with, or do they apply only to certain companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. The program itself primarily applies to companies that are fairly energy intensive with their operations. So companies needing to report emissions for facilities that generate more than 25,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year, right? So these are larger facilities in nature, kind of more on the industrial manufacturing side of the fence, as well as energy production, cement kilns, and then in some cases, large scale transportation and logistics operations. Eliminating it doesn't just affect regulated entities or some of these other reporting companies. It kind of takes away a common standard that investors, regulators, and business partners have relied on to measure progress and build accountability.
So then what does this mean? You mentioned, transportation and logistics companies a minute ago. What does it mean for them in particular? How would it affect some of our listeners?
Well, for transportation and logistics companies, emissions data is really front and center. Shippers, carriers, supply chain partners are all under growing pressure from their customers and investors and stakeholders to show real progress on sustainability. And without standardized federal reporting, it becomes a lot harder to compare apples to apples, so to say, creating uncertainty that makes it more difficult to demonstrate compliance and progress. And this gap shows the need for reliable third-party data and verification, which provides the transparency and credibility stakeholders are looking for in this space. So in absence of any kind of government-controlled data or collected data, the need will arise for more third-party data that's verifiable and, kind of high quality to fill that space.
So the argument, as I understand, for dropping the program is that it's going to reduce the amount of red tape companies have to deal with in reporting emissions data, and that it'll save money, without harming people or the environment. I know there's a lot of nuance to it, but, you just mentioned that, companies are going to continue to track and report this information. So practically, how will that be done if this program is dropped?
Yeah, it's true that, some view the program as red tape. But the reality is that most companies aren't walking away from emissions reporting. We mentioned earlier that a lot of stakeholders are requiring companies to be more transparent with their disclosure, and that applies to greenhouse gas emissions as well, right? So they still want credible data. to meet internal sustainability targets, right? So if you're a logistics company and you have goals around decarbonization, you want to have credible data to be able to measure and manage what you're trying to do there from a decarbonization perspective. You want to satisfy investor expectations, so access to capital and being able to disclose this information accurately and effectively. Some companies operate internationally and have to deal with, cross-border requirements for reporting disclosure of this type of information, right? So if they're no longer able to get some of that information reported up to the U.S. government, that doesn't mean that they're not required to report it for, an international entity. Even Canada, Europe, other geographies across the globe are requiring this. I think what we'll see is companies leaning more on third-party platforms, like I mentioned earlier, and data providers to fill the gap. In absence of this consistent data from a centralized source like the EPA, the challenge is while it's without the federal framework there, reporting becomes more fragmented, different industries and regions following different standards, there's no comparability. And that adds complexity, which is why high quality third party data, I think, is going to fill that void. Something that's validated, that's verified, that, can pass, both compliant and assurance needs and requirements across the board.
Right. You know what? I hear a lot when I'm out at conferences and things saying that this, as you mentioned, all this third party reporting, it's very much the Wild West. Some people have described to me, especially, smaller and mid-sized companies who don't know where to begin with some of these efforts. Is there an effort to come up with a common standard for reporting, for emissions, as well as other, these ESG related issues, outside of, maybe the government standard?
Yeah, well, we must be going to a lot of the same conferences because I think the same kind of conversation. And I've been involved in sustainability for long enough where your reference to the Wild West is very applicable, right? There were no kind of uniformity or conformance around any given standards. Every region had its own. Some were formal, some were informal. But I'm happy to report that over the last couple of years, there has been a definitive move towards centralization and comparability across regions and standards. So we've seen frameworks like the ISSB standard as an example, CDP, which we formerly known as Carbon Disclosure Project, and others gaining global traction. And industries are increasingly working to align on what good reporting looks like. So having kind of one set of guidance and framework to kind of rule them all, so to speak. The reality is that companies, investors, stakeholders, regulators, they all want consistency because consistency builds that trust and allows for, sound decision making when it comes to investing, when it comes to operations, when it comes to decarbonization and strategy. So while we may not be at a single universal standard yet, the direction is clear that most stakeholders want to align around, if not one, a very small universe of reporting standards. So companies like Sphera, we spend a lot of our time helping organizations cut through that noise, so to speak, by aligning the reporting with multiple frameworks in a pretty practical way, so that they can maintain compliance, but also prepare and be flexible for what might be coming next.
So, the greenhouse gas reporting program that we started talking about is still in effect while the EPA seeks public comments on the proposal. What are the next steps, and how do you expect this particular issue to play out?
Yeah, well, the public comment phase means that they'll be hearing from companies and industry groups, investors and NGOs before making any kind of final decision. I mean, they'll be collecting feedback to then inform, whatever final ruling they have. So nothing's settled 100% as of yet, right? The demand for reliable emissions data, though, regardless of what occurs here, isn't going away. So even if this particular program changes, pressure from customers and consumers, investors, regulators will keep pushing companies towards transparency, and the need for the type of data and emissions factors that the EPA was collecting under this program will still be necessary. The ones that stay proactive about this will be in a better position no matter how the policy plays out. So maintaining the course, so to speak. A lot of companies are going to continue to move forward with their programs, and they're going to continue to leverage data to create these more transparent disclosures.
Terrific. Sean, thank you very much for being our guest today. We appreciate your expertise and for shedding some light on this topic.
My pleasure.
Thank you. We have been talking with Sean Daley of Sphera. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you, Sean and Victoria. Now let's take a look at some of the other supply chain news from the week. And Ben, the world's been experiencing America's new trade policies and the rollout of tariffs for about 7 months now. And we're starting to see their effect on imports, including some creative ways that some companies are adapting. What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's exactly right, Dave. That's been one of the major themes of the year, of course, has been the impact on U.S. supply chains of these shifting policies on tariffs. The extra cost of those has to be absorbed somewhere by the American companies that are ordering those goods to be delivered here. So we've seen widespread shifts in some of the patterns that we're used to seeing of trade and supply chain imports and exports, whether that's at seaports or in trucking or in prices at stores. And now we saw a report from a 3PL in Nevada called ITS Logistics, which says that all that economic uncertainty is slowing down U.S. business momentum as we enter the fourth quarter of 2025. And of course, that comes just as the industry prepares for the onset of this winter holiday peak season every year. That part was not really surprising. We've heard that from a number of voices. But ITS also, as one of the reasons, the drivers for that had pointed specifically to the end of the de minimis exemption, which is a little bit more of a specific detail of these policies that we've also been writing about. But previous to August 29th, that de minimis exemption had allowed parcels valued at less than $800 to enter the U.S. duty-free, tax-free. But now that's gone. So many direct-to-consumer marketplaces are scrambling to adjust their strategies ahead of peak season and the fourth quarter holiday shopping rush.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a lot on the podcast over the last few months and in the magazine. It's there are a lot of tough challenges out there for importers. Did ITS say what companies are doing to try to adjust now to the new normal?
They did, and this is what sort of caught my eye about it. As you noted, some of those broader trends we've heard from various voices. But ITS pointed out that to cope with these increased shipping prices, an increasing number of retailers have turned to what ITS calls tariff hacking strategy, known as business to consumer. So we often hear about like B2B goods and supply chain flows, business to business, or B2C, business to consumer. But this one goes business to business and then to consumer. So this is a move to try to dodge the import taxes. So the retailers will route a online customer's e-commerce order first to a third-party wholesale platform, and they serve as a middleman, instead of shipping the goods directly to the consumer. So that, it sounds like a pain in the neck. It's one more step. It is, but it lets the shippers save a lot of money, 30%, maybe 60%, by paying the tariffs they have to pay at some point anyway, but they pay it on the wholesale price instead of at the retail markup, because it goes to that business in the middle, the business to consumer. So Josh Allen, who's chief commercial officer at ITS, said that we're now seeing e-commerce companies implement what he called a tariff arbitrage strategy in response to the ongoing changes in global trade. And those companies include everything from luxury sector on down to lower valued goods. In Allen's words, he said the strategy is being leveraged to mitigate shifting tariff impacts and keep overall costs down for their customers, consumers. And he called it a genius evolution in how companies are adapting to the economic impacts. So the end customer in this might not even notice this change that we're talking about, but it's one of the many operations in supply chain that does tend to happen behind the curtains and allows us all to keep receiving our inexpensive next day e-commerce orders.
That does sound really creative, and I'm sure it's helping many companies try to absorb some of those costs of the tariffs themselves. But I don't know. I've read economists who fear that we haven't really felt the full impact of the tariffs, and eventually most of those costs are going to be passed along to the consumers. Guess we'll just have to see how it all plays out.
Yep, we sure will, but we'll keep our eye on the ball.
Thank you, Ben.
Glad to.
And Victoria, we just talked about tariffs, and many of those are directed at Chinese companies. And you reported this week about one sector of the Chinese manufacturing economy that is seeing growth and a somewhat shift in strategy, and it affects our industry as well.
Yeah, that's right, Dave. So this is about mobile robotics vendors. Accelerated growth in China's mobile robotics market over the past 10 years is giving way to globalization strategies as those Chinese companies face growing economic pressures at home. Now, this is according to data from industry research firm Interact Analysis, released this week. Essentially, booming e commerce, increasing labor costs, and a government push to automate have been driving growth in China's mobile robotics market over the past decade. And responding to that trend, hundreds of domestic companies sprung up to supply autonomous mobile robots, automated guided vehicles, and other specialized warehouse automation solutions to businesses across the country. But the rapid expansion has led to a saturated domestic market, one characterized by intense competition and what the report refers to as, and I'm quoting, relentless price pressure. As a result, many Chinese mobile robotics companies are globalizing their business strategies, trying to expand their reach to customers in Europe and North America in particular. Interact Analysis analyzed more than 60 Chinese mobile robot vendors' revenues from 2018 to 2024, and they found that local companies that have expanded internationally have outperformed those that are focused solely on the domestic market.
Victoria, this will certainly affect the global market for mobile robotics. What did the report say about that?
Yes, that's right. A few things. They said the trend will help make automation more accessible to a broader audience, smaller companies in particular who are looking to add automation. It also may increase price pressure on American and European mobile robotics companies, and it's likely to expand partnerships between material handling systems integrators and Chinese vendors. So those three things primarily. One other note that I wanted to mention, this report sparked my interest because we have a special report on robotics and automation coming up in our November issue. And in doing some research for that report, I found that mobile robotics deployments for warehousing and fulfillment have been accelerating this year, in contrast to some trends we're seeing in other types of warehouse automation. This is due to growing demand for flexible and scalable warehouse robotics in recent years. We've reported a lot on that. And that trend has been intensified by the uncertainty many companies are up against this year due to the shifting trade policies you and Ben just talked about. Essentially, what that means is it's easier and more affordable for companies to add and subtract mobile robots as their demand fluctuates, as compared to investing in traditional fixed automation systems, for example. So we're seeing a lot of that happening, and our listeners can learn more about that and other robotics trends in November.
Great. And we look forward to seeing your full report on robotics in the November issue. Thank you, Victoria.
You're welcome.
We encourage listeners to go to dcvelocity.com for more on these and other supply chain stories. Also, check out the podcast notes section for some direct links to read more about the topics that we discussed today. And we'd like to thank Sean Daley of Sphera for being our guest. We welcome your comments on this topic and our other stories. You can email us at podcast@agilebme.com. We also encourage you to subscribe to Logistics Matters at your favorite podcast platform. Our new episodes are uploaded each Friday. Speaking of subscribing, check out our sister podcast series, Supply Chain in the Fast Lane, co-produced by the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals and Supply Chain Exchange. We just have a new 8-episode series on the top threats to our supply chains. All are available to stream now, so check out Supply Chain in the Fast Lane wherever you get your podcasts. And a reminder that Logistics Matters is sponsored by Duravant Integrated Solutions. Duravant Integrated Solutions brings precision and efficiency to every stage of your operation. Leveraging equipment from 4 leading brands, FMH Conveyors, QC Conveyors, NPI Sorters, and WolfTech, they streamline handling, routing, and sorting systems that help your warehouse or distribution center achieve peak performance every step of the way. Check them out at duravant.com. We'll be back again next week with another edition of Logistics Matters. Be sure to join us. Until then, have a great week.